Are you a dancing crowd? Yes, maybe? Okay. So I have my book here written with Klaus Schmack from Germany. He's not here at DragonCon, but I think I have some book plates that may have his signature on them. We'll see. Okay, so we're going to work on a couple ciphers here. Yeah? Yeah, come on. Okay, is it letting me change slides? Okay, good. So I'm going to launch right into it with some samples of different ciphers. This particular one is going to be a monoalphabetic substitution example, and this is a single alphabet. So we're doing one that was written by Sabine Baring-Gould, and he had written this book called Curiosities of Olden Times. And in this book, he created a ciphertext. So this is not one of the curiosities he covered, but this is one that he created for the book. So this is a cipher, and it's very short. And when you have very short ciphers, they're very difficult to solve. If you put it into a puzzle book, it's hard to find those patterns, like where's the E and where's the T. So I'm going to use this as an example of what hill climbing can do. This is a computerized technique that does some basically guesswork on codes. So when working on a code like this, often what we do is the first thing we do, we're going to swap it into letters, which makes it easier for our brains to munch and also easier for the computers to munch. And when we're putting the letters in, what we do is we start at the left and we start A, B, C, D, E. But when we get to something that is repeated, in this case, the 4 is repeated in this particular cipher. So A, B, C. So then any place that there's a 4, we will also put a C. So we get those repeating patterns. So we do that through there, and we continue on, and we get to the 2, which is repeated. In that case, it's the G, and so we put G everywhere that we see a 2, and so forth. Okay, so here we have the transcript, which is much easier for our brains to understand, but still it's difficult to crack because it's so short. It's possible, but I'm going to use this as the example. So it's really too short for normal frequency analysis. So now we're going to talk about hill climbing. What is it? Who here knows what hill climbing is? Who here has used it? Maybe a couple of hands. Okay, so I'm going to explain how it works. So we take up here at the right, we have that cipher, and then we have the letters, and we're going to come up with a key that we use to try and solve it. And it can just be a random key. It doesn't have to be anything in particular. In this case, we just got some random letters that we're going to put up against it. And then using that random key, we come up with its answer. So using that random key against the ciphertext, it thinks the answer is ZXRSTREFT, which is obviously wrong. But here's what hill climbing does with it. We then are going to rate the correctness of that plain text. And I'll talk in a minute about how we rate it, but we give it a numeric rating. In this case, the rating is 108, okay? And then we make a new key, all right? It's slightly changed from the other key, and we're still keeping the old key in our pocket, but now we have the new key, and we're going to decrypt our cipher with that, and again come up with a rating for the number. In this case, the number of the rating, which I'll cover in a minute, is 115. So in one case we have 108, in another we have 115. So now we see, has the correctness increased? If so, we're going to keep that new key, all right? And then we're going to go back and we're going to start the whole process again. If it did not increase the correctness, we're going to keep that old key that we had in our pocket. And again, we're going to repeat that process. So going this way, we have, from a random starting point, we're kind of going up the hill. Yep. A key that's better, that's better, that's better, that's better. And we get to the point where we no longer can make a key that makes the answer any better. We hope that that is the solution. It's the best that we can do. Now, I can hear some people going, what about that other hill over there? It's what's called the local maximum. What if it gets stuck there and it can't get any better because it's at that local hill? Well, there are ways of dealing with that. One of them is called simulated annealing, which is similar to a process that's used in metallurgy. when they are heating metal and cooling it and heating it, they know that there's bubbles that form in the metal as they're doing this, and they can change the heat to change the size of the bubbles. So we can do something like that with this, where we say, okay, we only want the answers that we're getting to be so big. We don't want tiny answers, we want big answers. So we can literally change the heat as we're doing the simulated annealing. And when we do that, it gets up to that local maximum, but it doesn't get stuck. And it comes back down and it will go up until it gets to, again, what we hope is the answer, right? So rating the correctness, I can see, how do you rate the correctness? Well, we base it on letter frequencies. So in this case, we had a plain text candidate, and looking at it again, our brains can look at it, it's almost sort of like English, because we can tell that the frequent letters in English are frequent in this candidate. And the rare letters in English are rare in this candidate. So we have E's and A's, not so many W's and Q's and Z's. If we had, so that would be a high score. If we had a candidate that looked like this, which again, our brain can look at and go, that doesn't look so good. So we know that the rare letters in English are more frequent and the frequent letters in English are rare. Okay, we give that a low score. So this is kind of, again, basically how our brain munches on it, but the computer can give it a very precise number based on these ratings. So we have that hill climbing attack that we did on this bearing gold cryptogram. And what we're going to do is we're going to run a whole bunch of comparisons. So in this case, we have the number of steps. So that number 100 on the left, I'm not going to show you steps 1, 2, 3, 4, because those are boring. So here we are at step number 100. And we're also only going to count successful steps. So steps where the score actually goes up. And here we have the table that we used for this particular step in hill climbing. And here is the plain text candidate. Now, again, our brain can look at it and go, oh, well, we know what the answer is at this point. The computer doesn't. Some of it's right, some of it's wrong. It's going to keep on with those steps. And over here on the right is the actual scoring function result that we had on this particular step. So we get the next step, and again, a different substitution table, a different plain text candidate, a different scoring function result. We went up from 308 to 341, and step after step after step, all right? So we get down here, and we get to step 107, where the answer is almost a murd in the hand is worth 2 in the mush. Well, the computer says, no, I'm going to try and get a higher score. And it goes to another step and it gets to 365, and it cannot get any higher score than that. A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, which we can tell, yeah, that looks pretty good. All right. So again, we have the solution going from those symbols to a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. So when computers are doing these hill climbing things, often we'll have humans look at the patterns, because like us, we looked at it and we don't need it to go all the way to the bottom. That's the answer over there. And that is often used to actually crack these codes. Someone looks at, in fact, with the zodiac ciphers that were just solved a few years ago, they used some hill climbing and they got partway through and they go, I don't know about this other stuff, but I see 2 really clear words right here. And then they had this thing called a crib. So they say, okay, we know that we're going to have this word in the answer. Get rid of all the other stuff. Only do things that have that word in the answer. Don't do just random every time. And using that method, plus a lot of other stuff before that, they were able to solve the zodiac ciphers, which had been unsolved for 51 years or so. Okay. So this method, many other codes have been solved this way. So that is a monoalphabetic substitution of single alphabet. So let's look at a different kind of cipher. We're going to look at a transposition cipher. So a transposition, there's many different ways of using transposition, but it's where you don't change the letters, you just rearrange the letters. So you take the letters and you read it backwards, or you rearrange them through some other pattern. So I'm going to take one particular method for transposition. This is called a turning grill encryption. Not all transpositions use turning grill. I'm just using that for the example. And this was used for hundreds of years where they would take this grill and they would put it on top of a piece of paper, and they would take their message. In this case, the message is along the top of the slide. It's to be or not to be, with some X's to fill it out. You'll see that in a second. And then you go through, you take the T and you put O, and you fill all of the holes there. Then you rotate, you turn the grill, and you keep putting in a few more letters, and you turn it and you put some more, and your last turn, and then the X's will fill it out. Okay. So then you have, in this case, a 4x4 grid, and along the bottom, what we do is we take each row. So the top row is ETTO, and the next row is OBRN. So at the bottom and the left, that is the ciphertext, ETTO, OBRN, and so forth. And so ideally, this message goes to its recipient, who will take those letters, and they have a grill of the same holes, and fill things in and rotate it and get the plain text that way. So how do you solve a turning grill message if you don't have the grill? Well, with hill climbing, it's a little trickier, because can we use the letter frequencies method to score a transposition? No, we can't, because it's the same letters. We haven't changed the letters. So the frequent letters are going to continue to be frequent and so forth. So what can we use? Well, we can use letter pair frequencies. So frequent letter pairs such as TH, EN, ER would be a high score. And rare letter pairs, QR, CX, PF, are going to give it a low score. Okay. And so here we have a very large turning grill message. And it's ironic that normally when we're trying to crack a code, we want a large amount of ciphertext so that we can get those patterns to take something apart. And with substitution ciphers, that works really well. And with transposition, sometimes it works really well. With turning grills, it does not work well. The larger the turning grill, the more difficult that message is going to be to solve. So someone put a large turning grill out on the web, right? So hill climbing can do it. Then I'm going to show you some other messages as well. And the scoring function, again, can be used, but you're using the pairs. So here I'm going to show a different kind of message. This one is a nomenclator message. And this is something that's been used hundreds of years. And you get these lovely, I think they're gorgeous, these large papers that have letters that are substituted, and also codes where you have single letters or pairs that are then going to be full names. So it's a mixture of the substitution and also the code book. Now, why is it called a nomenclator? Because there would often be people, you've probably seen this if you're watching Bridgerton or something, where when someone enters the room, they go, Lord and Lady Masterson. Well, that person is called a nomenclator. They're calling out the name. And so on these pages also became called nomenclators. They've been using them for 14th century, so many hundreds of years. So here's an example of a nomenclator. So you see on the left, we have substitution A to Z, 1 to 26. And on the right, we have pairs of numbers that will indicate particular words. So if our plain text message, in this case, is will come from London to Berlin, all right, so the word will would be 23, 9, 12, 12. And then the word from and from. Now, from is part of our word list. So in this case, from can just be the number 43. So you're saving some space. London, same thing, can just be 30. And then 2 we'd spell out, and Berlin we'd use just a pair. This is an actual nomenclator table that was used in the 16th century. Here's another one that was used in the 17th century. And you can see they made it a little harder, because for the letter D, it might be one of 3 different numbers. So it makes that substitution solution a little trickier. All the single letters were possible different pairs, and pairs of letters. So any an A, an E, an I, an O, and U, each of those could be one of perhaps 4 different pairs of numbers. So they were working very hard to make these things difficult to solve. And then individual words. In this case, we had Hitler, Holland, and Hungary. Each of those could be a code number of 3 digits. And I have gone into the library, and anytime you're going to find pages that use codes. There's hundreds, thousands that have not yet been decrypted that are sitting in there in the libraries. And what they do is they write what's called a plain text or clear text at the beginning. And then when they get the juicy bits, that's when they start using the numbers. So here's an example. And it's a little tricky to see, but I'll be showing you a better one here, where they have the clear text and then they have the numbers. And it was actually poor security here because where the numbers were, they wrote above the numbers what the correct letters were. Now, what they should have done was destroyed this at that time, but they didn't. And so it has come forward to us and we can use it and put it on PowerPoint slides. So how to solve a nomenclator message? Well, the easiest method is find the nomenclator table if you can. Here's an example of one from France. So again, they used the clear text and then they got to the juicy bits and they put in the numbers. And here we have the number 1383, which meant la cage, not la cage au faux, but la cage. So we have here, all right, I don't know who here speaks French. Reads French a little bit. Okay. So it says, Monsieur le Duc de Damatique qui lui avait, and then you have the numbers. Demandez quelques jours de repos après lesquels. So asked for a few words of rest after, and then go back to the clear text. Sa Majesté se proposait, and then da-da-da-da-da. And then again, the numbers. De 10 à 12 ou plus tard, from 10 to 12 or later. And then you get to la cage en se dirigeant par Tarancon. So la cage may have been a town at the time, or a shop or an inn. We don't know exactly what it meant, but we can see here that number 1383, and that was la cage. So how are you breaking a nomenclator message? Well, if it's well constructed, this can be very difficult. But often this is not the case. They were very sloppy at times. So this is an example of a poorly constructed nomenclator message. So again, by eyeballing it, you may see a lot of nines in there with the descenders there. And this was a message that was sent from the Vatican to a papal diplomat in Poland in 1573. And most of these, if you take them apart, are 2-digit numbers. And if you look and say a lot of 2-digit numbers, and a cryptanalyst will go, a lot of 2-digit numbers, and then a few 3-digit numbers, but we're going to think, are all those 2-digit numbers potentially letters, right? And the 3-digit numbers might be words. And in that case, this was exactly what it was. And so we ran I didn't, but somebody ran a frequency analysis on those 2-digit numbers, and we're able to find out what were the most frequent 2-digit numbers. In this case, 25 was the most frequent, 29 was the next most frequent, and frequency analysis worked, and we were able to take it apart. In this case, the message turned out to be Italian. Italian is not one of my languages, but giudicando, cieco nessuna cosa si possa restituire, puis sanita, and anyway, Italian. And then there's that first 608 at the front. We still don't know what it means because we only had that one example. So it may have come from a nomenclator table or some other type of code. All right, so breaking nomenclator message is an active field of research. The arms race that's going on right now in trying to solve these is we have a certain number of tables that we know what they are. And sometimes we find one of these new encrypted messages, and we can go in and we can say, aha, we have an encrypted message. Have we found the table that encrypted this message? And if so, we can decrypt it. And if not, maybe we can recreate the table. So if you heard about the crack a couple of years ago, there were messages by Mary, Queen of Scots. I don't know if anyone saw that in the news, but hundreds of her messages had been misfiled. And the people who found it, one of my associates, Lazary, who was able to recreate the nomenclator table based on all of the messages that he found. And then once he had recreated that table, there's a huge race. People are going across all the other encrypted messages that we couldn't crack to think, maybe those can be cracked against this new nomenclator table that was just created by George. And so if people find a new nomenclator table in the archives, again, if they make it public, then they'll go, okay, can we use this table to go and crack all those messages that we couldn't crack before because we didn't have the table? So it's an active field of research. So again, kind of these are historical ciphertexts. It's an active field of research. Can be transposition, could be substitution. Computer programs can be an important role because they help us recreate things and create the tables by doing the analyses. And if there's the hottest technique right now is hill climbing, and there are still many old ciphertexts to solve. So if you want to try and solve any of these messages, you can go online to a great site called mysterytwister.org. And what they do is they collect messages. They could be real messages or a message that someone has just created and tossed up there into the site. And you can kind of cut your teeth on those. And they have them rated by easy to hard. They include some of the world's most famous unsolved codes there as well, if you want to try them. I will be giving a talk on unsolved codes later here at DragonCon. One of them, by the way, Cryptos. Who's heard of Cryptos? Okay, Cryptos, you may or may not have heard, is 35 years old now. And the artist will be turning 80 next month, and he has decided to auction off the answer. The auction will happen on his 80th birthday this year in November. And I'll be talking about that here at DragonCon a little bit later. So any questions on hill climb? Yes. How often is it? Do we need to give her a microphone, by the way, or just... Sometimes there's a box with the microphones. Hi.
Hi. Is there times where you're going to be working on these cryptos and you'll have with the name breakers, you'll have it in one language, or you'll have some of it being written in one language, but when you go to translate the sections that are hidden, they're in another language or stuff like that?
It's a great question. I have not seen any. Generally, if they're writing in a language, they're going to be encrypting in that same language because the person who's receiving it is they want the recipient to be able to read what they're posting. They're not trying to make it difficult like a puzzle where one language here and another language there. Now, in Mystery Twister, they may well have those kinds of codes.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. No, it's a great question. Yep, come on up.
Do you ever use a dictionary for scoring your intermediate results?
Yeah, absolutely. Dictionary attacks are used quite frequently. Good question. The trick will often be which dictionary. And it was during the Revolutionary War, it was kind of funny because there was a great dictionary that was being used by both sides. So the Americans were using a dictionary and the British were using the same dictionary in order to encrypt their own messages. At the time, I don't think they knew that they were using the same dictionary. Yes.
Hello. I'm curious if you've noticed any trends in terms of what types of messages have these ciphers in them. So I know that they were used in scientific communication. I know they were used in diplomatic communications with people basically spying.
Yeah.
Are there areas where you're like, when they talk about this thing, their letters on this topic, you see a ton of ciphers and others were less so?
Yeah, good question. Most often it was diplomacy. They were the ones that really wanted to keep the secrets. But as telegrams were coming up, codes started becoming very popular because telegrams, people were charged by the word. And so they wanted to shrink the number of words. And also when they were transmitting numbers numbers are very easy to mistranscribe. You've got a very tired clerk and he was like 5678.2 and he's going to swap numbers or something. And so that's why they would have scientific code books that were designed specifically to convert numbers into words. So if someone's communicating the location of a comet, quite often, and so they would convert those numbers into words, and that way whoever got it would know this comet was seen at exactly this right accession and exactly at this declination. So scientific, diplomatic, those are the most common ones that I can think of. And also personal, love and intelligence, especially in the late 1800s. People would send postcards because they knew whatever they sent was going to go through many people's hands before it got to their lover or they wanted to. And they didn't want all these other people going, ooh, this is what was said, as it's being transcribed. And so they would put these messages in cipher. Also, there's just something very romantic about getting something and you need to take it into a corner and figure out exactly what was said. This diminished around 1900 in the early 1900s because then telephones were starting to come in. And so it was easier to have that one-on-one communication. But yes, romantic.
I'm curious if you've seen people using large language models and incorporating them in the cracking of the ciphertext.
Yeah, LLMs, large language models. I hear about this a lot. And I have used ChatGPT in particular daily, on a daily basis. I've gone up from GPT-4 to GPT-5. And I can say categorically that they are not good at cracking codes. They are not. With GPT-4, because Cryptos, I knew exactly what Cryptos said. And the chatbots, they want to be helpful. They want to give you an answer. And so if they can't solve it, they'll just make it up and say something that sounds like the answer because they want you to be happy. But it's not the answer. And with GPT-4 especially, it couldn't count. So the answer of Cryptos K4 is 97 letters. And again, we have this summarization and hallucination. I'd be saying, stop it, don't do it, don't do it. I'm literally yelling at it, saying, stop it. And then I would say, okay, just give me a sentence in English that is 97 letters long. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. I'd say, give me another one, give me another one. It might be 100 letters, it might be 90 letters. It could not count. These days with GPT-5, it is much better. And so if I say, give me a sentence that is 97 letters long, it can usually do it. And then with Cryptos K4, we know that we have certain clues, like we know the word Berlin appears at a certain point, and clock, and northeast and east. And so I'll tell it, okay, give me a sentence that is 97 letters long that has Berlin and clock and northeast and east. And it goes into thinking mode, and you can watch it think like, okay, the user wants this to happen. Can I do this? Okay, well, they don't want me to hallucinate. Okay. And it's really funny watching them think. If you're ever doing it, click on the word thinking so you can see them do this thing. And it'll come up with a sentence that is 97 letters long that has Berlin and clock and northeast and east. Doesn't make any sense. It's random, but it did exactly what I asked it to do. It's not the answer though. And it can't go, the most important thing, especially with the auction coming up, is can an AI come up with an answer that then they have a method for how you can get from the ciphertext to that answer. So with the auction, and I'll be talking more about this with my Cryptos talk, is whoever buys it, and we're estimating it's going to go for big dollars, like around $300,000, because that's what an Enigma machine is usually going for right about now. So if whoever buys it, if they choose to say, aha, I have the answer, and they provide an answer that is a plausible English sentence with Berlin and clock and northeast and east, the next question is going to be, okay, what's the method? Because if there's no method, no one's going to believe them. They could come up with a random text. So I've been putting the word out to all my circles saying, whoever buys it, I am happy to work with them to make sure that they get not only an answer, but that they also get the method. Other LLMs, Copilot, Grok when it's not being snarky, going on to Claude if you're paying for it. I've not heard of any of them being any better than ChatGPT is. And I like ChatGPT just because it's got more personality. I can tell it be funny and it'll be funny. And it knows my sense of humor. Okay, yep, all right.
So I imagine that the scoring methods would be different for different languages. So how do you proceed if you don't know what language it's in?
Good question. There are different frequency analyses for different languages. French will have a different set than Spanish. So you guess. You just have to guess. And you'll base this on where the message was found. With the case of the Mary Queen of Scots, they were found in with a bunch of other Italian messages. So that was a problem that people who were trying to crack those assumed it was in Italian, but it wasn't. It was in English. And George and Satori and a bunch of people I know, what they'll do is they go into these libraries and they're just going page by page. Is this encrypted? No. Is this encrypted? No. And they're looking for these messages to see how to find them and how are they filed. The libraries will often say something like letter and code, that they won't know what it is. They won't know what it says. There's no meta information. Who is it from? Who is it to? And so George and the others will look for letters written in code. And George loves these because he loves, a new message I get to crack. And then once he cracks it, he'll often give that information back to the library, which will help them to refile things. So you guess.
Yes, you mentioned the prevalence at the late 1800s and for these ciphers or for the code, and I was wondering, it seems to coincide with the golden age of the postcard, which was the late 1800s, early 1900s. And I was just wondering if, because that seems like a type of communication that would be especially vulnerable to a random person just reading. And so were they commonly used, for those?
Yeah, I've got pictures of hundreds of postcards that are encrypted for exactly that reason, because they're being handed from person to person in the family. And often, the majority of the time, it was simple substitution. They weren't using anything fancy like a Visioneer ciphers or odd turning brill. It was 99% of the time, it was simple substitution. But every so often we run across one like the Luton postcard. We still don't know what it says. It looks like it could be substitution. I've actually got it. If you look at my book, I've got it really faint behind the robot. I have the Luton postcard, because I'm hoping someone's going to look at it and see, I've seen something else that uses that same system. Because right now we have one postcard. We know who it's from. We know who it's to. We know when it was sent. It was provided to us by the great grandson or nephew of Luton, who was actually the owner of a football club. And he was sending it to his sister. So probably it was a system that they both knew and wasn't particularly complicated, but we don't know what it says. Okay. Any other? Bring it up. I'll cover anything. Okay. Well, thank you very much and have a great con.